Hello, my name's Gavin Smith. I'm the editor of Film Comment.
And I'm Scott Foundas, Associate Program Director for the Film Society of Lincoln Center and a contributing editor to Film Comment.
And we're here today to discuss Film Comment's a poll of the best films of 2011. This is the 12th year that we've been doing this poll, and this year 120 people participated. So we feel it's as close to a definitive look at the year as anyone's going to get. Any thoughts, Scott?
Well, I guess we should just jump right in and talk about the film that won the poll. At least we should say the poll is divided into two categories: films that were released and unreleased films, which are both films that have distributors but haven't been released yet, and films that don't have distributors. And the film that won on the list of distributed films by a substantial margin is The Tree of Life by Terrence Malick. And I'm not terribly surprised to see that, although if we think back to when the film premiered at Cannes, it actually had quite a divisive reaction among critics, including more than a few Film Comment contributors who kind of lined up on either side of it. And it particularly seemed
and I was right in the middle, kind of hedging.
Well, it particularly seemed to divide Terrence Malick fans, which was interesting, that some people who really have been big Malick supporters over the years didn't like this film, and some people like myself who've been kind of on again, off again with Malick saw this as being in many ways a kind of summary work, a movie that he'd sort of been building to in other films. But, you know, for me, it was a movie where his kind of interest in telling stories and his interest in exploring something more metaphysical was in a kind of perfect balance that I didn't feel in movies like The New World and Days of Heaven.
And then by contrast, the film that won the best unreleased films of 2011 was a film that I think has been universally acclaimed. This Is Not a Film by Jafar Panahi, the home movie that he made during his house arrest, which I'm not really sure what his status is now, but I think he's still under house arrest, so potentially he could make many more films like this. This film was made with home video equipment and cell phones, and then smuggled out of Iran in a cake, allegedly on a drive, and has been shown at a number of festivals, and has probably not done his cause a lot of good in terms of trying to appeal the sentence that has been passed on him, which is something like 14 years in prison and a lifetime ban on filmmaking.
And if I'm not mistaken, the title of this film pretty much sums up your opinion of it.
Yeah, I think it's an extremely interesting object. I think it's an important artifact. As a film, I didn't really think it was terribly good.
I'm interested that the number 2 film on the distributed list was Uncle Boon Me, Who Can Recall His Past Lives. So basically the top 2 films are the last 2 winners of the Palme d'Or in Cannes. And I remember invoking Uncle Boon Me when I was writing about The Tree of Life, because some of the negative reaction to Tree of Life in Cannes had to do with people's feeling that Terrence Malick had become a born-again Christian, and that Tree of Life, particularly in the final part of the film, was this kind of almost evangelical film that was promoting a very Christian reading of the afterlife, and that really seemed to rub a lot of people the wrong way.
With the idea what the last scene is the rapture or something.
Exactly, the people gathering on the beach, all of his, all the people he's known in his life.
Weren't very many people on that beach.
Nevertheless, I'm just talking about how the film was interpreted.
Rapture.
But it's just interesting that Uncle Boon Me was not accused by anybody, as far as I recall, of being a Buddhist propaganda film, even though it does present a very Buddhist view of of the afterlife of a man about to die, and what happens to him as he's revisited by the spirits of people he's known and other lives that he's lived. So I just find that an interesting point of comparison, that there was a kind of political reading imposed on Malick's film, which I personally didn't see in there. But even if one wanted to argue that Terrence Malick had become a born-again Christian and was trying to advance that view somehow in the movie, is that does that reduce the movie's value as an art object?
Well, I think the movie is probably, a good Rorschach. I think it's probably, it's I'm sure that if you're an evangelical, it's a very meaningful, just as meaningful to you as it would be to a viewer who's an agnostic or an atheist or a Buddhist or any. I mean, it seemed to me to be a film that actually kind of doesn't, rather more than Uncle Boon Me, seems to be a film that kind of feels more like a soup of sort of spirituality rather than having any kind of strong religious kind of affiliation. I mean, I found it a bit too new agey, but then that's in the eye of the beholder to some degree. But I did think it was very great piece of filmmaking. I'm just not sure what it all added up to in the end. And I suppose I might say the same thing about Uncle Boon Me. I mean, I've seen it a few times, and I'm still kind of don't think I could sit down and give you a kind of a coherent description of what the film is about.
Well, I'm also looking at the list and seeing that the number 3 film is Lars von Trier's Melancholia, a movie that you and I discussed in a forum like this.
Yeah, it was in a legendary argument that we had on a podcast,
from Cannes, and I'm wondering if now that the film is placed 3rd in the film comment poll.
Am I going to backtrack?
If you realize how wrong you were about it.
No, I did watch the film again, and I found it more bearable. Still somewhat boring, which is something that I've never really felt about anything else Lars von Trier's done until now. Although I think a lot of his films do have their longueurs in them. No, I don't think I've changed my mind. I actually, if anything, it's probably sort of hardened my position. But I don't think I feel the antipathy towards it that I felt at Cannes. And this was actually one of those films at Cannes that I definitely didn't fall asleep during. So I feel like it was a valid reaction. No, I mean, I think as filmmaking, I think it's barely there, and I think the acting for the most part is weak. I think the casting is kind of silly, some of it, and I found it to be a completely devoid of any emotional resonance or meaning.
Well, what about the idea that it was one of several films, including Tree of Life and Take Shelter, a movie that's also on this list at number 19, that were cosmic contemplations, either about the origins of the world or the end of the world, and that this was somehow a kind of zeitgeist topic or trend this year in the movies?
Well, I think in this conversation that you and I had with some of the other contributors to the magazine a few weeks ago, I was kind of peddling the line that we live in a very kind of pessimistic, kind of almost unbearable time, and that on the one hand, there seemed to be a whole raft of films that kind of try to escape into the past and into a kind of nostalgia, and not coincidentally related to cinephilia and to cinema. And by the same token, a ton of films this year that are very either apocalyptic or envision the spectacle of humanity being, annihilated. I mean, not just films like Another Earth or
Battle Los Angeles.
Yeah, Battle of Los Angeles definitely came to mind as an example of that. I mean,
not on this list, we should mention.
Sadly,
not on this list.
One of the worst, Hollywood spectacles of this year. But I do think that there's something about where we are right now as a civilization that probably is provoking these kinds of reflections, and I don't think that's a bad thing. I don't think it means that anything that kind of responds to that is automatically good. I don't happen to think that the Take Shelter is terribly good. The 25 minutes of it I saw. What other movies would we lump in with that?
Well, I think that we could lump in Patricio Guzman's film Nostalgia for the Light into the nostalgia category, which you were mentioning. I mean, I think we kind of touched on most of the
it's
the
films like
movies.
Hugo, which I think comes in at number 9 in our poll. Films like Hugo and
The Artist,
and I mean, clearly the films that take this route into the past are generally films that are very uplifting and inspiring and regenerative in a certain way. I mean, certainly, see a film like The Artist or a film like Hugo makes you feel like recommitting your vows to your love of cinema.
Although one of the interesting things
Renewing
I think
your
is that,
vows, I should say.
the movie that was the most overtly about nostalgia, that really took nostalgia as a subject, was Woody Allen's Midnight in Paris,
that's
which is
definitely another
number
example.
18 on this list. And what I found so interesting about that film, which I think is one of Woody Allen's best films, is that it actually makes a very compelling argument for the present, that it's a movie about people who are longing to live in the past, but who constantly learn that that the past that they imagine is a kind of illusion, and that everybody living in the past only wanted to live further in the past, which is, on one level, a kind of simplistic construction, but I think there's a nugget of real profound meaning in there, and I think it's actually, it may be
very small nugget of profundity.
I disagree.
Yeah.
I think it's a film that even though I'm happy to see that it placed on this list, has been underestimated by a lot of people, and I think that nostalgia has been such a kind of defining construct in Woody Allen's work. If you think about the music that he puts on his soundtracks, if you think about the fact that he's made other movies with a kind of fantasy component to them, like The Purple Rose of Cairo, that have this sort of longing for a previous time, that radio days that make the past look very honeyed and appealing, that this movie is a kind of rejection of that in some way, and that coming from somebody who's 75 years old, who's sort of advocating embracing the present, I found that very inspiring.
Yeah, I'm not sure that he's really rejecting it. I think he's acknowledging that it's the fatal flaw in his sensibility, but I somehow don't think he's now going to be making films that are of the present and that are kind of intensely involved in the urgent issues of our day. I think that's not going to happen.
No, but I do think that
I mean, this is a film of an old man.
Yeah, but I also think if you think about the change in Woody Allen's filmmaking approach, that suddenly he went from being the iconic New York City filmmaker to making movies all around the world, in London, Paris, Spain, now in Rome with the forthcoming one, that alone, I think, suggests a kind of embrace
he's definitely
of
getting a
moment
second wind, isn't he?
yeah.
I mean, I do think that it's been really good for him to have kind of uprooted himself from New York and gone on this little world tour, or European tour, I guess. I sort of don't see him going much beyond Europe. And I think it's been very good for him as a filmmaker, and I don't think it's meant that the film is become masterpieces, but I think there's been there's a quality of renewal about that I think's very positive.
I mean, this might be a good point to talk about a film that, while not an apocalyptic film, definitely seemed to be a film that was trying to take a certain social anxiety into account, which is the movie that placed number 20 on this list, Kenneth Lonergan's Margaret, which is a film that was really first in the news for its very troubled road to cinema. This is a movie that was shot 5 or 6 years ago, that was caught up in a long legal battle between Lonergan and the studio and the producers over the cut of the film, the running time of the film, and which is a movie that is sort of a panoramic portrait of people in New York City who are many of them are bystanders to a tragic bus accident at the beginning of the film, and the movie follows their lives and the lives of their loved ones and their parents and children and that sort of thing. And it's a movie that catches something in the air, some kind of millennial tension, which permeates the film.
I think in the case of this film, I'm in the category of the 99% who haven't seen it, and you're in the category of the 1% who have. The studio only released it for I think it was probably going to be a week, and then I think it managed to hang in a few theaters for a second week. There was a press screening, but it was a real last-minute press screening. I had wanted to see the film since I first heard about it, and when I first heard about the sort of extraordinary difficulties in the cutting room. I mean, I have has passed in front of me, have had passed in front of me a DVD of a 4-hour cut of the film, which I would like to watch someday, but I would really like to see the finished result as well. And I'm sort of gratified in a way that a film that I made a mental note to see the film, but it got away from me, as so many things do. But I'm sort of gratified that it has its champions, a lot more champions than I thought it would. I mean, a number of the people that participated in the poll made it their #1 film. And so I was kind of pleased to see it just scraping into the 20, because
when you
clearly this is an underdog film.
When you consider how few people actually saw it, even among professional critics, it was also a strong runner-up in several categories at the Boston Film Critics voting last week. And, personally, I found the film very flawed, but enormously ambitious, and it has great things in it, chiefly a really wonderful supporting performance by Jeannie Berlin, who plays a friend of the victim of the bus accident, who sort of, in a way, becomes the character who takes Anna Paquin's character, who's the main character, who in some way inadvertently causes this bus accident, kind of takes her through this adult world of moral responsibility, which the film is very much about on some level, about a teenager kind of having her eyes open to the complexities of the adult world. And it's wonderful to see Jeannie Berlin, who of course was the lead in The Heartbreak Kid for her mother, Elaine May, almost 40 years ago, having a really prominent role in a new film and just giving a wonderful performance.
He really does talk. He really knows how to talk. I just can't do it. I got to say, if the film is, flawed and ambitious, it's probably more my kind of movie. For some reason, I always seem to really respond more to, flawed films than to films that seem perfect. I mean, I can't say that there's any particular flaw in The Tree of Life, but somehow I feel a little shut out of it. I tend to like films that don't quite work, and so this Margaret, is probably the film for me. I'm really looking forward to having a chance to see it on the big screen. I hope somebody somewhere shows it again soon.
Well, I'm also wondering, looking at this list, the top 20 is predominantly foreign films, which looks a lot like a lot of top 10 lists I published in the LA Weekly over the years. But I was struck when I was putting my own top 10 list together, a top 20 for this poll, how strong a year it was for American films. And there were quite a number of them that actually made my top 20 that didn't make the overall poll's top 20, like Bennett Miller's Moneyball, the Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows Part 2, Spielberg's Adventures of Tintin, all of which I think are really exemplary works of studio filmmaking. And that it was really quite a strong year for Hollywood films, unexpectly so.
Yeah, I mean, Moneyball comes in at 38, which is sort of surprising. I thought it would have come in a lot higher than that. This year there are 12 foreign language films out of the 20, and I think that is that kind of balance. I don't remember there being that kind of balance in the past. It tended to be more, 2/3 foreign, maybe 1/3 Hollywood. And, well, yeah, I mean, those were the good movies, I guess. I mean, I'm not really
one
sure.
could also mention Bridesmaids, a film that I liked very much, which it's nice to see kind of coming back at the end of the year.
That comes in number 36, but yeah, I don't know what to say.
And we also have two films on the list that are true epics, films running 4 hours long, Raul Ruiz's Mysteries of Lisbon, and Edward Yang's A Brighter Summer Day, a movie from 20 years ago that was released for the first time in the U.S.
Not forgetting the autobiography of Nicolae Ceausescu.
Which is only 3 hours.
Yeah, only a mere 3 hours.
But what's interesting, I mean, not to shamelessly plug the Film Society, but of course we gave A Brighter Summer Day its U.S. theatrical premiere here back in November.
I mean, a lot of people from other cities were voting for it. I don't know if it's actually made it to runs in other theaters, but I think they were voting for it because we showed it and that put it on the official record of releases this year.
Well, I think people have been able to see the film over the years in its handful of showings and festivals and other retrospectives.
Well, one wonders which cut they saw, because as we know, there are two cuts, right?
Yeah, and now, thanks to Martin Scorsese, a filmmaker who also appears on the list with Hugo at number 9, A Brighter Summer Day has been beautifully restored in a new 35mm print, which we showed, and hopefully will go around to other cities. But Mysteries of Lisbon, which clocks in at number 6, ended up being the penultimate film of Raul Ruiz, because he did manage to complete another film before he died, which is going to premiere on the festival circuit sometime in the next year.
Scoop! I didn't know that.
And this movie, I was just very heartened to see how popular it was, not just with the people voting in this poll, but with audiences who really seemed to embrace it, just judging from the reaction that it had here at the New York Film Festival, and then when it came back to play here in the Film Center. It seemed actually quite an accessible film in a way, despite the running time and despite Ruiz's reputation of being a kind of avant-garde filmmaker in a way.
I mean, I'm sort of gratified that of the five of the 6 covers of Film Comment are films that appeared in this top 20, and I think the 6th one, the one that we're actually our January, that our annual best of issue is the January-February issue, and our that cover was a film that's absolutely nowhere in this, and that's James L. Brooks' underrated How Do You Know?
But that was last year's movie, so you'd have to look at last year's
so it's always that, and I'm not really sure what our cover is going to be on our current in production January-February issue. We're still right down to the wire. We're trying to decide which movie it's going to be, but it's certainly probably not going to be a movie that's going to have turned up in this poll. One curious thing, actually, I noticed is that one of the most anticipated movies of the year really didn't seem to feature on anyone's list, and that's The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, which is one of our candidates for the cover. So, I mean, I guess from the point of view of consistency, I guess that would be the one put on the cover because nobody voted for it. I wonder if that's because they haven't seen it, because the number of screenings for the film has been very limited, but I sort of doubt it. I sort of feel like that's the big film of the year that somehow didn't really find its audience amongst the people participating in the poll. What are your thoughts on that, Scott?
I mean, speaking personally, I admired the film a lot. I think David Fincher is really one of the major figures in American cinema right now, and watching Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, I had the sense that probably nobody since Stanley Kubrick and Spielberg has as well understood both the artistic side of filmmaking and the commercial side of filmmaking. I think that Fincher is able to make movies for a large audience that also really push the medium artistically in a significant way. For me, having gone in, never having read The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo or its sequel books,
me too.
Never having seen any of the Swedish film adaptations, I still came away with the sense that the underlying material was not up to the level of the material that David Fincher has worked with in his last few films, particularly The Social Network and Zodiac. Yeah. I just found that there was something a bit perfunctory about it. I didn't find the identity of the killer to be particularly surprising. I found that there were a lot of secondary and tertiary narrative threads that weren't that compelling, and that as much as I enjoyed watching Rooney Mara, who I think is terrific in the movie, and the filmmaking, which I think is faultless, I just found that on a narrative level, it was not engaging me in the way that I might have hoped, and that there was not necessarily a lot of subtext there beyond Stieg Larsson's sort of, desire to kind of stick it to Nazis, abusers of women, all other scum of the
Serial
earth,
killers,
which seems to
yeah.
kind of be the overarching metaphor of the film. But I think as a commercial entertainment, it's definitely up there this year. I mean, I think audiences will be
Yeah, I
very
think it's-
satisfied by it, and I think David Fincher is, as I think we discussed, entirely entitled to make a film like this.
Yeah,
think
I mean, it's great counter-programming for Christmas. I mean, this is not a Christmas movie, but I mean, it's going to really satisfy people who get a little tired of the prestige pictures that come out at this time of year.
Well, that's to me one of the most interesting things about the film is, again, not knowing anything about it. I was actually quite surprised to discover how grotesque the film is, how violent it is, how much perverse sexuality there is in it, and that this
Perfect for Christmas.
Yeah, well, just to say that this has been such a phenomenal success all around the world, this property, I think that, in a way, connects to this sort of nihilistic or anxious or apocalyptic feeling that we were talking about before, that we're living in bad times. I mean, Girl with the Dragon Tattoo definitely feels like it taps into that vein.
Oh yeah, that's true. That's a good point. I think I mean, I like you, I went in without any foreknowledge of what the movie was about. I mean, I was a little disappointed when it kind of resolved itself into being sort of another serial killer kind of movie. It could have been it would have been a perfectly acceptable film if it had just been about solving a murder mystery. But then when the ramifications begin to kind of, extend, sort of expand to include all these other killings, I found myself sort of wondering why is David Fincher doing his third movie about, a serial killer? I think David Fincher was probably thinking that as well when he went into the project. And he certainly found plenty of other good reasons to make the movie. But at a certain point, when Rooney Mara was doing her kind of cyber stuff on a computer, the thought went through my head. Oh yeah, didn't everybody sort of say, "Oh, Zodiac is about being trapped"? It feels like being trapped in a filing cabinet, for a week. And this movie at a certain point sort of makes me feel like I'm sort of being trapped in a hard drive for the length of the movie. And you can certainly make the case that this is kind of like the other end of the other end of the continuum from the Zodiac sort of analog serial killer search to dragon tattoos, digital serial killer investigation.
Yeah, it's kind of the love child of Zodiac and The Social Network in that sense. But maybe we should.
That's very good.
Maybe we should also just talk briefly about a film which I don't think you've seen yet, which is the other big Scott Rudin production that's opening at the end of the year, the movie Extremely Loud and Incredibly Close.
Haven't seen that.
Adapted from the Jonathan Safran
That's
Foer
nowhere
novel.
in this poll either.
And it's nowhere in this poll, and it was nowhere at the Golden Globe nominations, which were announced earlier today. And it's actually not been many places at the end of the year, even though it's been written about endlessly by award season bloggers and even the New York Times as this kind of stealth dark horse Oscar candidate that's been kept under wraps and is entering the season at the last minute. And now, when it doesn't show up in these different contests, everybody says that's a real surprise, because this anticipated Oscar frontrunner, which actually very few people have even seen yet because the screenings were delayed even more than the ones of The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, they're surprised when it's not in these different lists and awards and that kind of thing. And
What's your verdict?
Well, to me, I was not a fan of the film, and I think that has a lot as much to do with the film itself as it does with the source material. A bit like The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, but in this case, a piece of material that is kind of a school of American fiction that I find absolutely toxic. I would put it on the same shelf with the work of Dave Eggers, and there's a kind of extraordinary preciousness about it, and a kind of a fantasy of what a child's view of the world is, and this a strange sort of exploitation of September 11th for a very manipulative emotional effect, that all of which I found very, very off-putting. But aside from that, I think it's entirely possible that the film will show up at the Oscars somewhere. I just think what's interesting about it is something that you and I have talked about and that's been written about in the magazine, is how much, especially at the end of the year, the discussion about movies becomes so much more about all of the hype around a movie rather than the movie itself, so that you have these movies that nobody's actually even seen that are sort of pre-designated as front runners for this or that award just based on the cast or the material or the filmmaker, and in no way is it any kind of critical analysis. This is all done before people have even seen these movies.
I mean, it's pretty noticeable this year, just like every other year, that all of the sort of end-of-year prestige movies, really, nobody votes for them. The critics, if you look at this top 20, there isn't any, there's no War Horse, there's no Tintin, there's the nearest thing you've got to a kind of towards the end of the year kind of, prestige film would be a small film like The Descendants, which, I think generally is widely regarded as a fine film. And it's almost as if what happens at the end of the year with this kind of, with this bottleneck of expensive, important films is the year's already over, and they just feel like a kind of a bombastic sort of afterthought that's entirely geared towards awards and has nothing to do with any kind of a critical conversation, or even for that matter a real conversation with the audience. I mean, I think it's sort of a ritual. It's sort of like you dutifully go to these films because they're these big important films that are somehow going to matter, and one of them will probably be saddled with as the Academy Award winner of that year, and then it enters history as. I mean, if we were to look at the down the years of the films that won the Best Picture Academy Award, which I think would be a really fun exercise, and I might actually do this. How many of those movies are actually any good? I mean, 50%. 25%. I mean, how many of them are actually great films?
But what's worth
by any reasonable kind of standard.
But what I think is worth pointing out is that quite a few of those movies, even if we were to think in relatively recent years of movies like The Silence of the Lambs and Braveheart, actually opened in the first part of the year. And I think that people always act surprised when a movie like Midnight in Paris or Bridesmaids and Hurt Locker, when these movies come back into the conversation. The Hurt Locker is a really remarkable case because that's a film that actually had shown in festivals a year and a half before it finally won the Oscar, and yet it stayed in the conversation because it was a great film. And I think that people always act surprised when a movie from 6 months ago suddenly comes back, like Bridesmaids or Midnight in Paris, but actually I don't think those movies ever really went anywhere. I think if you actually do look at things objectively and not through the blinders that the studio publicity departments, I think, really work overtime to put on journalists so that they're so narrowly focused on just these movies that are opening at the end of the year, you see that there are a lot of really strong films that are released all throughout the year. And I was particularly happy to see that when A.O. Scott and Manola Dargis in the New York Times did their year-end survey, that they, particularly Manola, went out of her way to discuss that point and actually to rattle off a list of movies that were released earlier in the year, many of which are, movies in this top 20. I mean, movies like Certified Copy and Meek's Cutoff and Film Socialism and Le Quatre Volte, they all opened months ago, but they stayed present in the minds of critics, and even though those may not be the front runners for the Oscars, I think some of the films that will be in the mix are films. But I think you have to make a distinction between what critics are thinking about and what voters are thinking about. I mean, voters as in the people that vote for the Golden Globes, who aren't really critics, and the people that vote for the Academy Awards, who certainly have nothing to do with critical consciousness. I think that there's two different, there's two different years. There's the year as it's seen by people who are sort of discerning and constantly engaged on a day-to-day basis with movies, and then there's the other the rest of the Academy voters and so on who really kind of maybe they're casually watching movies throughout the year, but then towards the end of the year there's this tremendous pressure and this tremendous kind of deluge of stuff that they have to think about and start seeing. And catching up on movies that were released in the year, but also the movies that are stuck right in front of their noses, that are the important pictures, as I'm calling them, that happen in December.
things like a dangerous method, or The Descendants, or there's another one here I was looking at on my list, Midnight in Paris. These are films that maybe they saw them 6 months ago, but are they getting a push now? I imagine The Descendants is. I don't know if Midnight in Paris is getting a big push. Then you've got a film like The Actor, which is kind of
The Artist.
That's right. I'm always calling it The Actor. Why is that, Scott? I think it must be because the main character is an actor. That's a film that in a certain sense is a sort of a dark horse, because I think before December nobody was talking about it, and that's probably the film that is the kind of the point of intersection between critical consciousness, audience consciousness, and voter consciousness. I think that's the one that's going to kind of really go all the way. Not that I care. I really don't care if it wins an Academy Award, honestly.
Although you do like the film.
I like the film.
We both do.
Sadly, it didn't make it into our 20, or am I just...
No, it's not on there.
Yeah, where is the
it's
actor in here?
It's not that far down,
Oh,
The Artist.
dear.
But it's...
The Artist, the actor,
What I am so heartened by about that film is that I think it is, along with Hugo, going to be a big invitation to the audience to learn more about film history. I mean, I've already talked to people who've seen The Artist who've never actually seen a silent film in its entirety before, and that alone is a remarkable achievement. I think you can quibble about the quality of the film. I happen to think it's a good film. I've talked to a lot of people who haven't. I've heard compelling arguments about what people don't like in the film, but I think that the significance of the film being a feature-length silent film that is going to penetrate parts of Middle America where there are no cinematheques and film museums and that kind of thing is really significant, in much the same way that I think Hugo will really capture the curiosity of both children and adults about the origins of cinema.
Well, I think the beauty of that film is it's a foreign film without subtitles. I think that's why it's going to, as you say, penetrate further than other movies made by other countries. I mean, I think on the one hand you're right. I mean, it's great that it's kind of enlightening to people that maybe haven't really thought about film history. On the other sense, it's kind of depressing that so many people are coming out of it and saying, wow, I've never seen... Did they ever try to make any other movies without sound like this? I mean, it's... I don't know. I mean, that's not why I like the film. I think that the idea of it being somehow performing missionary work for film history is a nice bonus, and it's an interesting kind of byproduct. But I just think it's a lovely film and a delightful film. I think that it occurs to me that film comment had sort of really been on its game. That would have been the film that we would have been putting on our cover right now. And instead we ran a review of it in our last issue before we really had an inkling of what a phenomenon it was going to become. I guess we should have really just listened to you. I'm sure that you would have said, "Oh yeah, don't worry, this is going to be one of the big ones," and we should pay more attention to you, Scott.
I think we should quit while I'm ahead, and and if anyone's still with us, we thank you for
Wake up!
Listening to two blowhards for this long talk about the films.
One blowhard and a guy who can barely get a word in edgeways, I think, would be more accurate. If anyone gets to the end, that's where the kicker is.
We'll see you soon. Okay.